I never thought I would actually have to do a video pertaining to this topic, especially since I've done so many topics or commentaries about how black people, both man and woman, have been discriminated based on their hair, young or old, kid, adult, however you want to put it. Especially since we've seen black people get fired because of how their hair was, or get kicked out of school because of how their hair was, and all of the above, and so much more. Well, I just came across this article and via somebody on Instagram where New York City has put a ban on people being discriminated against because of their hair. I said, oh, I think I need to do a video about this. And ironically, every story that is covering this, every article that you find, the cover is of a black individual wearing their natural hair. So that lets you know right there who the target always was. But you know what? They didn't even have to put up a picture for us to know who it was the entire time. We knew it was black folks. But let me go ahead and get into this story. New guidelines out this week give legal recourse to individuals who have been harassed, punished, or fired because of the style of their hair. Under new guidelines to be released this week by the New York City Commission on Human Rights, the targeting of people based on their hair or hairstyle at work, school, or in public spaces will now be considered racial discrimination. The change in law applies to anyone in New York City, but is aimed at remedying the disparate treatment of black people. The guidelines specifically mention the right of New Yorkers to maintain their natural hair, treated or untreated hairstyles such as locks, cornrows, twists, braids, bantu knots, fades, afros, and or the right to keep hair in an uncut or untrimmed state. So that's basically saying black people in New York City, y'all can wear your hair however the fuck you want it in its natural state, and they can't do shit to you. Or can they? Because you know they probably gonna try to throw a loophole in there somewhere. This is probably gonna piss off a lot of people though, because they love looking at, like, I cannot have any of y'all who wear your hair in its natural form ever walked anywhere and had people just stare at you, whether they were amazed by how your hair was, or some of them looked at your hair like with disdain, like they were mad because your hair looked like that. Let me know down in the comments. I'm almost certain that many of you probably fall into that category. In practice, the guidelines give legal recourse to individuals who have been harassed, threatened, punished, demoted, or fired because of the texture or style of their hair. The City Commission can levy penalties up to $250,000 on defendants that are found in violation of the guidelines, and there is no cap on damages. The Commission can also force internal policy changes and rehirings at offending institutions. The move was prompted in part by investigations after complaints from workers at two Bronx businesses, a medical facility in Morris Park and a nonprofit in Morrisania, as well as workers at an Upper East Side hair salon and a restaurant in the Howard Beach section of Queens. Now, how about that? People got discriminated about their hair while working in a hair salon. Something tells me that that hair salon was probably white owned, full of just bourgeoisie folks. The new guidelines do not interfere with health and safety reasons for wearing hair up or in a net, as long as the rules apply to everyone. The guidelines obtained by the New York Times before their public release are believed to be the first of their kind in the country. They are based on the argument that hair is inherent to one's race and can be closely associated with racial, ethnic, or cultural identities, and is therefore protected under the city's human rights law, which outlaw discrimination on the basis of race, gender, national origin, religion, and other protected classes. To date, there is no legal precedent in federal court for the protection of hair. Indeed, last spring, the United States Supreme Court refused an NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund request to review a case in which a black woman, Chastity Jones, had her job offer rescinded in 2010 at an Alabama insurance company after she refused to cut off her locks. But New York City's Human Rights Commission is one of the most progressive in the nation. It recognizes many more areas of discrimination in federal law, including in employment, housing, pregnancy, and marital status. Its legal enforcement bureau can conduct investigations and has the ability to subpoena witnesses and prosecute violations. There's nothing keeping us from calling out these policies prohibiting natural hair or hairstyles most closely associated with black people, said Carmelyn P. Molasses, the commissioner and chairwoman of the New York City Commission on Human Rights. They are based on racist standards of appearance, Ms. Molasses continued, saying they perpetuate racist stereotypes and say that black hairstyles are unprofessional or improper. In New York, it isn't difficult to find black women and men who can speak about how their hair has affected their lives in both subtle and substantial ways, ranging from veiled comments from coworkers to ultimatums from bosses to look more professional or to find another job. For Avery, age 39, who works in Manhattan in court administration and declined to provide her last name for fear of reprisal at work, the answer to how often she feels remarks on her hair in a professional setting is every day. Avery said her supervisor, who was white, encourages her to relax her hair where she was wearing a shoulder-length chestnut-colored braids. She's like, you should do your hair when it is already styled, or she says straight is better, Avery said. She added that the only color her supervisor approved of is black. Gerbina DeRosa, who was interning to be a social worker, had her hair in box braids as she ate lunch with a colleague at Shake Shack on East 86th Street on a recent weekend afternoon. Ms. DeRosa said her hair sometimes elicited microaggressions from her superiors at work. Like people say, I wouldn't be able to recognize you because you keep changing your hairstyle. That's typical, said Ms. DeRosa, age 24. Her lunch partner, Pahola Capellan, who was also black and whose ringlets were bobbed just above her shoulders, said of her own experience, it's very different. There's no discrimination because my hair is more acceptable. A 21-year-old black woman who gave her name only as Eni said she quit her job as a cashier at Manhattan's Wendy's 6 months ago when a manager asked her to cut off her 14-inch hair extensions. I quit because you can't tell me my hair is too long, but the other females who are other races don't have to cut their hair, said Eni, who now works at a hospital. There has been a long professional toll for those with certain hairstyles. Almost 18% of United States soldiers in active duty are black, but it is only in recent years that the military has dropped its prohibitions on hairstyles associated with black culture. The Marines approved braid, twist, and lock hairstyles in 2015 with some caveats, and the Army lifted its ban on dreadlocks in 2017. And certain hairstyles are freighted with history. Wearing an afro in the 1960s, for instance, was often seen as a political statement instead of a purely aesthetic choice, said Nolaway Brooks, an author and professor at Cornell University whose work explores race and gender. Dr. Brooks said that today, black men who shave designs into their hair as a stylistic choice may be perceived as telegraphing gang membership. Now, that is indeed true, because I've seen so many stories with little boys who had simple parts in their hair, just one line or two, maybe three, and they always say it looks like they're part of a gang. How in the hell is a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, even 6-year-old in a gang? Somebody explain that to me. People read our bodies in ways that we don't always intend, Dr. Rook said. As Zora Neale Hurston said, there is the will to adorn, but there is often backlash against it. An associate professor of labor and employment law at City University of New York School of Law, try saying that 5 times fast, said that attitudes will change as black politicians like Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor of Georgia, and Ayanna Pressley, who represents Massachusetts in Congress, rise in prominence. Well, I'm not a fan of Stacey Abrams, but, that's their prerogative. As more high-profile black women like Abrams and Presley offer natural hairstyles, twists, braids, we may see a positive cultural shift that would impact how court views these guidelines that seek to prevent discrimination based on hair. Hair discrimination affects people of all ages. In the past several years, there have been a number of cases of black students sent home, this is going into what I just said, or punished for their hairstyles. In New Jersey, the State Civil Rights Division and its Interscholastic Athletic Association started separate investigations in December when Andrew Johnson, a black high school student, was told to cut off his dreadlocks or forfeit a wrestling match. Last August, an 11-year-old student in Terrytown, Louisiana, was sent home from school for wearing braids, as was a 6-year-old boy in Florida who wore dreadlocks. In 2017, Maya and Deanna Cook, twin sisters in Massachusetts, were forced to serve detention because officials said their braids violated school grooming policy. Similar instances in New York City could fall under the Human Rights Commission's expansive mandate, as do instances of retailers that sell and display racist iconography. In December, the commission issued a cease and desist order to Prada, the Italian luxury fashion house, after the window of its Soho store was adorned with charms and keychains featuring blackface imagery. The fashion company instituted training in city human rights laws for employees, executives, and independent contractors. It also immediately pulled the line of goods from its United States stores. That was a very interesting read there. I have to give my kudos to New York for doing this. Hopefully, this is something that can grow across state lines, because I have seen some white people come up into corporate offices or professional offices and their head be all over the damn place, shitting all over the damn seat, and nobody says nothing. But you let a black person come up in there with their natural hair, and it's a problem. I remember it was another story, and I'll never forget it. I think it happened in California, where it was this little girl who was in the classroom, and she was sitting in the front, and she had her natural hair out. And you know, black people, when they wear their hair natural, it grows up and out, and you know it's very full. It doesn't look dead, and it doesn't just drop. They can get it styled that way, but naturally it doesn't do that. And the teacher said, you know, they ended up kicking her out of the classroom because they said her hair was too distracting. I said, well, if it was too distracting to you, or if you felt that way, why didn't you just move her to another seat? Like maybe move her to the back of the classroom. That way she could still learn and wouldn't be so distracting to maybe the kids that were behind her. Notice it wasn't the other kids that complained. It was only the teacher, and the teacher, of course, was a white woman. I will never forget that. And of course, I know about the ones with the boys having the parts in their head. I've seen about 2 or 3 stories about that, and plenty of stories about black girls or black women with braids. I even remember one that came out of Canada. I think there's one girl, she was doing training for a job, and she had her hair a certain way. But when she actually was getting ready to start at the job, she wore her hair in its natural state, and then they ended up firing her because of it. Because they said it was some kind of rule in the policy, but it wasn't no rule in the policy. It was something that the manager at that store just came up with, because they even went through the rule book and said, that's not in the policy. You just made this up on the spot because you were being discriminatory. And I think they ended up firing that manager. So congratulations to the city of New York for doing this. I never thought I'd actually see this happen, but I'm glad that it does, because this is another reason why a lot of black people are shamed into not wearing their hair naturally, because being kicked out of school, maybe not being able to get a job or things like that. And it's so petty, because it's like, we can't control how the hell our hair grows. But see, it's also a pride thing. You know, you take pride in your own natural hair, you become prideful as a people, or start to lead more back into it. Like it said in an article back in the 60s, when black people started wearing their afros and, you know, their natural hair, that was a political statement. It was basically them pushing back against the establishment of societal norms, that you have to look a certain way. Of course, it eventually became fashionable over time, but in its essence and its origin, it was more of it was the black power push back against the white establishment trope. And it worked for a while. It really did. And I think it's starting to move its way back into fruition slowly but surely, because I see some people out today with their afros out, both men and women. So I actually do appreciate the move that they're making with this. Hopefully it's no loopholes, because you know they'll try to slip something in there, like I said at the beginning of the video. And to the black people that are in New York and everything like this, please do not abuse this. And when I say abuse it, I mean, don't make any false claims saying that someone discriminated you because of your hair, just because this thing kicked in. If it does happen, please try to have some proof. That way, if it has to go to a court, you can have your ass backed up, so nothing happens to you, or they don't try to rescind on this, because all it has to do is be a mishap one time, maybe a couple, and then they will scale back on this. But again, shout out to New York City, the city of New York, for coming up with this, I would say, agenda. But y'all let me know what you think down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. I will talk to you in the next one.